Hey, this is Showtime Kirik, recording this video again because I forgot to hit the record button because I'm a dummy. I'm basically going to be talking off the cuff here, so expect some pausing, some thoughts because I'm formulating them as I go. Generally speaking, what I wanted to talk about today, though, is sort of the changes that were made to the hyperspace system. We have a good example of what that looks like here in this multiplayer game I've been playing that I'm just letting run right now because I want to see if my empire implodes. It won't, but whatever, never know. Who knows? Um, One of the major changes made in Apocalypse, for those of you who are not aware, is that Stellaris was changed into a hyperlane system. This was controversial at the time. I don't think I think there are people who probably feel very strongly about this still, but I think at the end of the day that this was to the benefit of the game. Um, so let's examine what those hyper space or space travel systems were. There were four of them. One of them was jump drives, which is basically effectively worked as jump drives do now, except you could just do it all the time. But the other three were warp, which was short range, but let you go in any direction and was relatively slow. You had hyperlanes. Yeah, they're hyperlanes, and then you had wormhole travel. The problem is that in the old system, wormhole travel was broken as hell. Um, you could, for example, build a wormhole station, say here, not or like even here, and then hit this system in one jump at the beginning of the game. That is impossible to defend against. Basically, it removed a lot of the military considerations of the game because all conflicts boil down to is whoever has the biggest fleet can basically bully the other one into submission if they both have wormhole travel. There's no real way to defend against it, right? Hyperlanes were able to defend against other hyperlanes. Warp travel could kind of defend against warp travel. Not easily, but like way easier than wormhole. But like warp travel was also difficult and complex for its own reasons. Again, similar to wormhole. You could see them coming at least, so you could at least start moving and repairing. Hyperlanes also were sort of expansion screwed compared to the other two. With wormhole, you could actually do crazy stuff like build a wormhole station here, jump here, build a influence base here, get territory here, jump over here, build influence over here, and like that would work. It was crazy, but it would work, and you could make like a multi enclave type empire, which was actually pretty funny. I don't think though that it was good for tactical considerations of the game, which again, Apocalypse is the war expansion. Introducing hyperlanes, I think, really emphasized that this game was going to be more focused around sort of the conflict nature of the game, and I think that was to his benefit. The main example I would think about, right, is that you can't. In the old game, you would have to build defensive structures irrespective of where your frontier outposts were. So in order to defend against a wormhole, you would have to build them basically in every single one of your territories, which is not economically feasible, right? If you're building defensive structures, that's because you're expected to be attacked, which means you're probably not as strong as the person who's going to be attacking you. How is it that you have a stronger economy than them, but not a stronger military, right? Like, they're being able to build defensive emplacements that actually are useful is very important in my opinion, right? Hence why I think hyperlanes were kind of needed. Furthermore, the AI, especially with like the enclave strategy, where you just would have like tons of little enclaves, they're not like super able to determine like what's a good point to attack or defend. It just makes the whole. I'm sure it made the AI a lot more difficult to work around. Whereas if you have one unified system like this, it has problems, but at least it's something you can code around and design around, right? So people felt very strongly at the time. I really hated losing wormholes. I thought wormholes were just the coolest thing on the planet. Even if like their downside was basically, you just go slower at the as you get further into the game, which basically means you just need to warp research jump drives as quickly as possible. Who cares? Like, that's the only downside? Oh, jeez, man. Or they can destroy your wormhole stations, which is a little annoying, but you just build wormhole stations everywhere. So, whatever. The the second sort of reason why going to hyperlanes is appealing is not just because you can build defensive structures at choke points. Like, for example, I'm sure there's a good one around here somewhere. Well, they built that there because there's a mega structure. Like here, they built defensive structures here theoretically to stop an attack from this direction. It's actually galactic terrain, right? Nebulas, these hyperlanes that only connect certain parts of the arms. The L-gate system, which was eventually introduced. These are sort of the galactic terrain features that would have made hyperlanes like really useful, really interesting, right? Is the idea that the galaxy now could actually have galactic terrain because hyperlanes could only connect in certain points. The reality is that's not really what's happening, right? There's no tactical considerations for the most part with the galactic terrain. If you're in a nebula, it's random chance usually. You're not intentionally building around a nebula. You're not always building your fleet to work in a nebula because a nebula is very rarely the dominant area where you're going to fight someone. It can work, but you have to go out of your way to do it. Somehow I managed. Okay, good to know. The second sort of contingency about galactic terrain is that, like, the connectors, right? So, like, this connector to the other part of the galaxy, or, like, say here, right? These two. You just rush those. There's not really a consideration about, like, is that a good choke point to have? It's almost always a good idea to rush the connections because that's a way to break into other arms of the galaxy. There's no tactical considerations going on here. You either spawn near one and grab it as quickly as you can and get more territory as a result, or you don't. There's no, like, this is the choke point that I'm going to hold because, especially on the arm. I mean, not in this game, but usually when you land near an arm like this, like the outside arm, there's no one up there. So it's just free territory. It's free real estate. Just grab it. It's free. But, so there's not, I don't really think that there's a huge tactical consideration going on here. There's no fighting over these exit points usually because there's nothing really constraining you at these exit points. You either have them or you don't. You got access to the territory or you don't. There's no by not having access to this, you're not losing access to something, if that makes sense. So it's not really a tactical consideration. The L-gate cluster is, interesting, but it's done via L-gates, which introduces another whole problem where basically the crisis becomes completely galactic in scale instead of a localized problem, which is completely annoying and I hate it. And the L-gates are fun and conceptually, but opening them basically just makes the game an annoying, unplayable mess. And I hate that. I hate that so much. But moving on, why am I talking about this, right? Why am I annoyed to some extent right now about the fact that about the change to hyperlanes? It's not about the fact that I lost something. It's about an unrealized potential. There's a conceptualization of the Stellaris game itself that the developers have not sort of broken. And that change is to be frank, that Stellaris has to be a galactic scale, right? Somehow they want to make us believe that 600 stars can exist in a galaxy alone and that that's a galactic scale. Okay, sure, whatever. But if they were willing to move past this sort of roadblock, this mental roadblock they have, they could instead focus on, say, a star cluster, a superstar cluster of some sort, right? Let's say, like, instead of focusing on this galaxy, we can focus on this area or this part of the galaxy, right? And then maybe you could have like a huge nebula that basically makes travel this way impossible. And if there's no, instead of having a hyperlanes here, there's no hyperlanes, and then maybe there's no hyperlanes here, and you could basically focus on this area. And instead of having 15 star systems here, you could have 500, right? You could focus on this area, and then that could then let you make actual terrain, right? Real terrain. And like you could put a nebula straight through the middle of the sector. That would make sense. You can't running a nebula through the entirety of a galaxy. I don't think we've discovered that. If we did, I would hope they would put that in the game, but I don't think they have. You could put dark spaces or specific isolated clusters that then connect via one major line, and all of a sudden the fact that you are contained within smaller clusters away from the galactic whole, those clusters, those connections out become super important, especially if that cluster out, especially if all of your accesses out are blocked by enemies, right? The terrain becomes much more important in this sort of cluster situation, right? You can actually make terrain. You're not forced to basically make a circle every time. Some form of a circle. Let's be clear. It's a circle. It's always a circle, and it's some form. And that gets stale, and it's really it's kind of sad. They could have done so much more. And again, that's the thing, right? They're talking about, we can make this galactic terrain and all these unique features on the map, and they never did it. They never did it. And the only explanation for why is they're not willing to basically turn around and go like, why don't we just make a sector map? It would be, one, more believable, and two, easier to write for. More on this later. But we don't want people to make pictures of Stellaris and put up screenshots of Stellaris that make it look like it's not a galaxy. Because, if people were actually to look at the map and go like, there doesn't seem to actually be that many stars in our galaxy. Like, that doesn't seem believable. But, whatever. Come on, guys. You can get past that, right? You can get past that mental block. You guys are smart. Do it. Just do it. Do it, forehead. I'm joking. But if they were willing to go past this mental block, right, you can make unique maps. You can make interesting looking maps. Right? The second part is that it actually frees up the various storytelling opportunities you have. One of the surprising things is that if you think about it, we've only had 3 crises this entire game. It's been 5 years, or however long it's been, since Stellaris came out, and we've not really had a new crisis. They're all basically thematically the same crises. You would think that would be something that the developers would be jumping over themselves trying to implement every single time, and instead what they implemented was basically, we are going to make the player a crisis instead of making like a bunch of new plots and crises and stories that the player can interact with. And the problem with that is that, again, it's a galactic scale. You can't have a hidden horror just kind of be like, another thing that we didn't know about in this part of the galaxy comes out and just tries to murder us. Like, how many times can you write that and it be believable? But if you were in a supercluster that was isolated from the rest of the galaxy, right? That could be a story that could be written. It frees up so many storytelling opportunities that it's really interesting. The second thing is that it also introduces a new sense of wonder, right? If this is just a supercluster of the galaxy itself, what about the rest of the galaxy? What could be out there? What stories exist out there that could infringe upon our little corner of the galaxy? What kind of relics and caravans and all that could come through our parts of the galaxy? What stories could we experience, right? And I think if you're willing to sort of embrace the cluster mentality, you get new opportunities for writing, for map design, for gameplay features, right? You're no longer constricted, right? So here's some new gameplay features, right? Developing hyperlanes to extragalactic clusters are no longer just, not extragalactic, but like other clusters are no longer just about like discovering the L-gate. You could have a cluster that's not linked to anything and then have people researching ways to pierce through the nebula, or maybe create new links as the map goes along to create a more interconnected map, right? As society develops, travel becomes easier between the various clusters, right? That could be a very interesting set of features that just doesn't make sense when you're talking about a game on a galactic scale like this. But if it's a localized scale, it makes a ton of sense. Furthermore, if you're worried or thinking about like, well, are we sure the scope is big enough? Keep in mind, in a given region of a galaxy, there could be thousands, tens of thousands, millions of stars, right? Like, go play Elite Dangerous, right, and look at the star cluster where humanity lives, and it's just like there's thousands upon thousands of stars. It feels like, and then there's colonies outside. Oh man, it's complicated, right? It doesn't require a lot to make an interesting map, and it doesn't require it be a galaxy either, right? It's conceptually it sounds cool, marketing wise it sounds cool, but gameplay wise, replayability wise, like it doesn't. So like I understand from a marketing standpoint you want to keep the galaxy, right? You want to keep this look, but I think that under the hood I think the developers need to seriously confront the idea that like, okay, there's a marketing side of the game and then there's an actual gameplay side of the game. Let's start embracing the gameplay side of the game here and start creating new maps that will be interesting to play. And when we go to the new marketing stuff, we'll try and use these systems whenever possible, like the pictures, right? But whenever we're actually doing streams or people who are committed and interested in learning more about the game, let's go with the stuff that actually makes for more interesting gameplay, right? These make good screenshots, that doesn't necessarily make for the best game. Yeah. I think that's most of what I wanted to cover. I am somewhat interested to hear about what people think can be done with like super clusters of stars. Like, what are some terrain features you can imagine having? Like large asteroid fields, maybe making travel through space more dangerous. Like I don't know what could be out there, but there could be more. And I'm really excited by the idea that there are more possibilities that exist in the game if we were to go to sort of this sector view, right? It would be an amazing content release, in my opinion. It frees up so much. It allows for more stories. It allows for more customization of the maps. Because, like, one of the most annoying things to me, I'm going to continue going here, is that, like, we have, like, 50 Galaxy Generation mods, but there's only so many ways you can make a circle. If the developers were able to create a system, which basically already exists, by the way, let's be clear here, they just need to actually, like, implement it somehow, that allows them to form some sort of super system of some sort, or super cluster, and then use that to sort of push people to making map generation tools about that with different terrain types and all that could be generated into the map. That'd be way cooler. But I feel like I'm rambling and repeating myself at this point. Again, let me know what you think. Can I think of anything else I want to talk about with regards to this? Stories, talk about action. Oh yeah, one of the examples I want to use is like China or Mongolians, Crusader Kings 2 or 3, right? They exist outside the map, and in this context, they could come in and be a new crisis, a different kind of crisis you could encounter, or either as a mid game or an end game crisis. Like that would both be acceptable. Just something to think about. Yeah. Anyway, cool. That's just me talking. I'm still working on reviews for other expansion packs and stuff. This was just something that I wanted to get off my chest, I guess. I was just more speaking off the cuff. I was like, oh, I should probably record this. Anyway, this is Showtime Keurig. Signing off. Talk to you later. Have a good one. Have a good day.